All right. Well, g'day everyone. I'm Andrew Whitehouse, and I'm very lucky enough to be involved with the Autism CRC as the Research Strategy Director. Welcome to today's webinar, which is the third in the series of Autism Month's webinars that have been hosted by the Autism CRC. As I mentioned, we're hosting 4 webinars this month, and we've already had 2 of them. This is the third of the 4th. The first one was about the autistic voices, where autistic leaders discussed influencing change and effective collaboration within the autistic community. And the second one was yesterday, which was talking about the early years, in particular diagnosis and early intervention. Today, we're really lucky enough to have our third, which is about the connection and quality of life for autistic adults. Certainly, I know that we've all struggled with connection over this last little bit of a period during COVID time. I hope you've all been doing well, keeping healthy and sane. Myself, I found that my own parenting style has gone from 90% yelling and 10% fun to about 50-50. So I'm classing that as a bit of a win, and I hope you also had wins along the way as well. As we go through the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions through the Q&A panel down the bottom. The Q&A panel has 2 speech bubbles. You should be able to see it down there. Please include the name of the presenter that you'd ask to submit the question, ask the question of, and make sure you do it through the Q&A panel rather than the chat. And you can send those questions at any time. We'll have question time at the end. All right, I need to shut up and I need to start introducing people. So today we're focusing on adulthood, and in particular, we're focused on improving opportunities for autistic people to successfully participate in higher education and employment, as well as identifying best practice in physical and mental health management. Today, we're really lucky enough to bring to you the creme de la creme of adult autistic researchers in Australia. We're very lucky to have them here. So we're going to be talking about a range of topics today. But before I go on too much, I'm going to introduce Donna, who's our first presenter today. Donna is the co-leader of one of our Autism CRC research projects and a senior research scientist in the CSIRO's Australian eHealth Research Centre, leading the neurodevelopment and plasticity team. Today, Donna's going to talk to you about the co-design and a collaborative approach with autistic individuals and key stakeholders to develop the content of a chatbot brain to support those who are undertaking higher education and to do much more. So without further delay, all of us are going to mute ourselves and go off the screen, and we'll throw to Donna, who's actually in a bit of a public place at the moment, so she's doing extremely well to be here. So just bear with Donna as we go through it. Okay, thanks, Donna.
Thank you. I hope you can see the slides, and thank you so much for such a kind introduction. I do want to take you through the story of a co-development of a chatbot that was designed to facilitate participation in tertiary education. So why are we doing it? Well, there's an increasing number of university students with autism and related disorders, and there's some evidence that show that those that go to uni do have better life outcomes. But obviously there's significant academic and non-academic challenges. A recent study, an Australian study by Anderson, showed that those that access the support systems had a better university experience, but there is some reluctance to use those support systems, and that's partly because of previous bad experience or perhaps poor advocacy skills. So I'm sorry if you can hear the coffee machine in the background. Please, I'll try and talk over it. So what we thought we could perhaps get around some of that reluctance by providing those support systems through a chatbot. And what is a chatbot? Well, it's a conversation agent that's accessed via speech or text. It's usually delivered by a smartphone or a web page, and it uses natural language processing. So it'll take in speech to text, it'll use artificial intelligence to determine what those sounds are and what they mean, and computer response. And it does this using a case-based reasoner, which has a syntactic matching algorithm and a sentiment analysis algorithm, and also a logic reasoner. And through these, it analyses the structure of the data. So what is this sound? And it recognises words from that sound and computes responses. So in this example, you can see in the screen, the user has said hello. That's recognised by the AI as a word that is a greeting. And it then searches through its brain for a response, which in this case is, hi, how are you? A logical response. In order to give a response, it's got to have something in its brain to be able to do that. So for each chatbot that we build, we need domain-specific knowledge. How did we go about co-developing this one? Well, of course, we had ethics. And then there are four main components. The first one is that content building of the brain. And we did that through focus groups and also gathering of resources that are already out there. We then have a programming component where we enter all that data, test it for any bugs, and then we would normally do a trial. And unfortunately, we couldn't do that for this project, but we were able to do a qualitative evaluation. So the focus groups we held with the Curtin Specialist Mentoring Program, which has mentees and mentors, and we provided them with a workbook that, could you shut that door? Thank you. We provided them with a workbook that had two main sections. So the first section, we looked at their positive experience of university, and that we had a checklist of things that they might like, and then free text at the bottom. And after that, the second part of that section was some strategies and tips that they had for what made these things enjoyable. In the second section of the workbook, we had what was challenging about university. And again, we had that same checklist, free text at the bottom, and then a list of things that they could put in to answer questions of what might help them with these challenges. Now, going through that, data, we actually got some surprises. So we expected that for mentees that they would find travel and social interaction quite challenging, but in fact a third of them enjoyed travel to and from the uni, and 3/4 of them enjoyed the social interaction, which is not to say that they didn't find it challenging. They weren't mutually exclusive. Not surprising was that academic aspects were challenging with classwork, assignments. 87% had exam and semester stress compared to 50% of mentors. And half of them found it challenging to look after themselves. And that was really about getting good night's sleep and eating well. In the free text space at the bottom, they were able to put in things that they enjoyed about uni. And here we saw there was a lot of information around support. And I think this is a real credit to the Curtin Specialist Mentoring Program. It kind of contradicts Anderson's study, but I think it shows that they've found a way to deliver that support in a way that is accessible and non-confronting. So people use it and they value it. There were a number of other things there that they valued: volunteering, self-development, and my personal favourite, days when people bring their dogs. On the negative side, there were some negative experiences at university, and these came into two main themes, and one of them was that feeling left out. So even though they did value their friends, they still felt that they didn't know who to talk to or what to talk about, and that was a concurrent theme. And again, time management. And if I was to run one program through university to help people on the spectrum or related disorders, it would be a time management course on multimodal experiences like using colour coding, using audio prompts, how to ways that work for that person's brain to help them with that time management. So through this focus group, we got the strategies and tools that they'd suggested that would help them, and a number of other documents that already exist: disability discrimination, information on counselling services, and the SOLVE method for social awareness. And we put that together with the information in the that we got from the focus groups, and that gave us a number of different modules, things like greetings, mental health, and there's a program that runs in the back of all our chatbots that picks up keywords that are linked with anxiety, depression and suicide ideation. And if anything comes up along that line, the Lifeline prompt comes up with a phone number for people to call. We've got things like how to ask for an extension with an email template so they can just fill in their course and send it on out. Also, what is autism? Common strengths, famous people that might be inspirational, some tips on managing time. The what is got things like language idioms, like what does bite the bullet mean? What's the role of mentors and the SOL program I already mentioned? And also the chatbot's able to have a wish list. So you can say, I wish you could do this, and then we can store that for future improvements. So then we move to the programming and testing. And this is where, sadly, the project kind of had a little stumble. So here's us with all our bits together. And unfortunately, our participants were a little sleepy at this point. So one of the ways we wanted to do the programming was to open it up to participants through the Autism Academy of Software Quality Assurance, and we ran a hackathon. We had quite a bit of interest, 16 to 20 people, only 8 turned up on the day. They weren't interested in doing the actual programming. They were more interested in playing with the information that was already in there, which was fine. We got lots of good feedback from that. But we also had a remote portal where we recruited through Aspect and Autism Hub for anybody in the wider autism community to come and do the programming. And unfortunately, we didn't get too many people through there. However, one of the people was a teacher, and they went right the way through and corrected all our grammar and literacy errors. It was fabulous. Thank you very much to that person. So then we moved to the testing phase, and here we had a little bit more participation. So we did again that opened up the remote portal. We had it open for 3 or 4 weeks for people to come in and have a look and play and advise us of any bugs. And we got a few people coming through there. We also had a testing session with the mentors at CSMP, and that was really quite well attended, and we had they played with it for about an hour to 2 hours, and again gave us some information on bugs. But the lessons that we learned from this component is that we really need a greater focus on recruitment. We just sent out flyers. We recruited through 3 different areas. I think in future we really need a targeted population. We have email addresses, we do follow-ups. We need a much better recruitment campaign. We need better instructions on the remote portal so people understand that it's not an onerous task to program. It's a really simple language. We also need to look at our participants. Students are really busy, and even though we tried our best to take into account the university calendar, there are still some challenges with assignments due, and expecting a research project on top of that is optimistic. Potentially we could recruit graduates and have them look retrospectively what would help them, or prospective students for what might help in the future. Nonetheless, we have a prototype. So we did do co-development for the content and some of the testing and programming. As I've said, we did most of the programming and testing in-house. We then ran a workshop with Autism Hub as a qualitative evaluation. And here we found that the young adults that came along to that really validated what we'd found in the previous work, and that number one, it needed to provide assistance with uni, but also help with daily activities, transport, social stuff, mental health, food, all really important. They also thought it was really applicable to employment, and we're now looking at with My Way, another project with Autism CRC, to see what synergies are there. They did raise some privacy concerns that would obviously need to be addressed going forward. So in conclusion, we built a chatbot that can navigate the social, physical and environmental cues of tertiary participation. It has information on anxiety, depression and counselling services. It has relevant resources from student support services and health services. It provides communication strategies such as asking for an extension or understanding legal rights. It's available for smartphone or web use. And it was provided to Autism CRC with an AIML guide, which means that new modules can be added at any time in the future, plus modifications if phone numbers change or if new material is provided. So this is a really busy slide, but I'd really like to thank Tracy Reagan, our community advisor, and of course, all our participants and Autism CRC. Thank you for listening.
Donna, thank you so much for that. That was not just interesting, but you were very heroic in doing this in a public place. So we really do appreciate the time that you've taken to do this. Thank you, Donna. Just to let you know that Donna is having to run off right now, but she has indicated that she'd be more than willing to answer questions via email or in another capacity. So thank you again, Donna. That was fabulous. Before we waste too much time, we're going to go straight on to our next speakers. We're really lucky today to have two speakers who are really at the top of the game, and that's Liz Pellicano and Wenn Lawson. So Liz is an Autism CRC project leader as well as Professor of Education at Macquarie Uni. Dr. Wenn Lawson's an Autism CRC researcher and part of the project team for two Sylvia Roger Academy programs. Liz and Wenn are also the co-chairs of the Australian Autism Research Council. Today, Liz and Wenn are going to be talking to us about a really interesting project and also about the process of working with autistic researchers as interviewers in co-produced projects seeking to uncover the hidden histories of late diagnosed autistic adults. Over to you guys, and I really look forward to hearing you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. It's a huge pleasure to be able to talk about this project. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. It's a privilege to be able to speak with my wonderful collaborator, Wenn Lawson, but also to be talk about the project itself, in part because I think it's a fantastic project on a really important topic, but also because of the wonderful team that worked on this project and really made it happen. So on the project itself, as I'm sure you all know, receiving a diagnosis of autism in adulthood is increasingly common for some people who might have either been misdiagnosed in childhood or who have missed out on a diagnosis entirely, leading to what some people have referred to as the kind of lost generation of autistic adults. And while we have some insight into the reasons why adults seek a diagnosis, much less is known about what late diagnosed autistic adults' lives were like before they received an autism diagnosis, and especially how they might have survived, thrived, or even experienced distress while they were growing up. And this is important because there is limited understanding of what a good life means to autistic people and which factors might play a critical role in making sure they have a good life. And so listening to and learning from the life histories of those who went through childhood without a diagnosis should serve better to inform, diagnostic practices and ways of improving the lives of autistic people, especially new generations of autistic people. So this project was co-produced with autistic adults and sought to do just that. So we invited late diagnosed autistic adults to share their life histories, to understand better the consequences of living without a diagnosis, to understand what precipitates an autism diagnosis, led people to seek a diagnosis in mid to late adulthood, and also to identify the perceived impact of receiving that diagnosis. And there were two really overriding approaches that we adopted in this project. And the first and foremost really was a participatory approach. And this really made this project be the amazing project that it is. It was a collaboration between non-autistic academic partners, autistic co-researchers, and an autistic advisory group who all actively participated in making decisions about the research. It's been fully guided by the experiential expertise of our autistic collaborators, who have made sure that the methods have been thorough, respectful, and supportive of our autistic participants, and also will ensure that the interpretation of the data is similarly respectful and attentive to autistic people's perspectives. So that's our participatory approach. We also adopted an oral history approach. So in oral history projects, the aim is to record recollections of people and groups, to preserve their stories and voices. And oral histories allow for a multitude of view and give a voice usually to individuals and groups who have often been marginalised in conventional histories, by allowing them to tell their stories in their own way. And while there's a kind of growing literature on qualitative research, examining the lived experiences of autistic adults, the use of oral history really tries to situate people's story in a particular time and place in history has rarely been used. So that's the approach that we adopted for this project. Now, this is what we did. I'm not going to go through this kind of complicated figure here, but this was just to show you that this was not a simple project where, you know, we recruited people, we called them up and did a few-minute interview to tell us about their story. This did not happen. This was a real process. So telling your life history is a big deal. And the project is really a testament and that we were really attentive to people's needs during the process. So that's just to show you the process, and the extent of the process. The results are still being analysed, but the team, the amazing team, managed to recruit and interview, you know, within a period of 8 months, 28 late diagnosed autistic adults from all around Australia. So these, to be eligible into this, to be included in this study, people needed to be over the age of 45 and to have received a diagnosis after the age of 35. And also to have, you know, spent most of their time in growing up and living in Australia. So there was a kind of, you know, select group of people from mid to late adulthood. And as you can see there, our mean age is 54 years, and people range from between 45 and 72 years. We have 2 72-year-olds. So that's where we are so far. I'm going to hand over to Wenn now, who's really going to talk about the his own, but also researchers' reflections on being part of the project, and then we're going to talk about participants' reflections on being on their you know, experiences of being involved and telling their own life histories. So over to you, Wenn. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. From the beginning, we met for discussion over everything from participant qualification through to means for locating participants. I have a number of resources we all did that we were able to work through. People were from varied walks of life from our team: history buffs, autistics, researchers, professors, novice researchers, and so on. And inclusion was and is at the very heart of all that we were doing. We all appreciated how important the project is, and were equally committed to making it a success. So there was lots and lots of communication between us constantly. Next slide, please, Liz.
Oh.
Thank you. This meant things like traveling from wherever we were. I live in Victoria, so I would travel up from Warrnambool to Melbourne and then on to Sydney to meet up with the rest of our team, where we learnt about equipment like cameras and tripods and recorders for recording oral history. We had a whole day together, and a bit longer than that actually, because we stayed over. And that was really important because we wanted to make sure we used the equipment properly. Lots of Zoom meetings to set up, discuss over things like ethics, who in the team would do which bit, and how we would organize interviews and so on. And from that came weekly Zoom meetings that eventuated, mostly from the 2 research assistants, Gabby and Joanne, myself and Liz. And this was to check in on how we were going with the progress of the program, but also for debriefing. It's very interesting working with autistic people who are all very different, and we all had energy needs, we had sensory needs, we had lots and lots of questions that we needed to work through. So that Zoom time each Monday afternoon was very good. Thanks, Liz. Next slide, thank you. Some participant reflections on this process. Liz, did you want to read through some of these?
Yeah, I can read through some of them. I mean, Wenn and I, in the last part of the project, Wenn and I interviewed the participants about their experiences of the project. And so this is what they had to say. You know, they talked about their reasons for, for actually wanting to take part and be able to tell their story. Some people talked about, you know, I just want to be able to add to that resource, that knowledge base, just support people that are just newly finding out for themselves, just to get the understanding a bit more out there in the wider NT community. I thought this was another way of potentially trying to expand people's awareness, both of people on the spectrum and not on the spectrum. Another person said, so for me, it's wanting to make a difference so my son doesn't have to go through what I've been through. And having survived, I think it's important that people know that people with autism can survive.
Yeah.
And finally, a couple of people talked about, you know, it was actually really important, the process for them and their own structured reflection on my life might be beneficial to me, help me dig a little bit deeper into my past and particularly my early history. And that was a really good thing.
Is there another slide, Liz?
Yeah. Do you want to go, or do you want me to go?
You do.
Okay.
Thank you.
So they're on, and then they talked about on the actual taking part, and lots of people did talk about, you know, that it was really exhausting, draining, telling their story. Some people said that they slept for, you know, 14, 16 hours after having done it. It's a big deal. But having done that, they said, you know, I found with other people as well, the more I can talk about it to people who get it, the more my own acceptance is solidified. Well, there is relief about the diagnosis, but yes, sadness in the fact that there was so much more that I could have done in my life. And that's why I need to do this so badly for my own children, for anyone else who is doubting whether it's okay to talk about being autistic. And another person said, the more I said it, the more I thought this is all okay. My story is normal and it's good to tell it. And there's nothing, you know, I think when I was a child, there were autistic behaviors that I showed that I was made to feel ashamed of. And now I don't.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry. And there was one, sorry, I must have missed a slide there. Do you want me to keep going, Wenn?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Liz.
And we had, you know, these people were interviewed by autistic researchers, and we wanted to get a sense of, you know, what that meant for our participants. And, you know, this is what they said, you know, even made it more reassuring because I knew she'd get it and she'd get me. Another person said, knowing allowed me to drop the filters a bit more, if that makes sense. And then another person said, it just did provide an immediate sense of comfort that I could say something which would be difficult. Another person said about our autistic participants, autistic researchers, bloody wonderful. I have no objection to being interviewed by anyone that's not autistic. I'm not that sort of person, but just knowing that they were set another level of safety within it. If I'm going to offer something, I've got to feel safe about it. And finally, someone said, you know, I just feel a lot more comfortable about it because I think there's lots of stuff that happens when non-autistic people are making decisions about what's best for people with autism. Once you've read a little bit and got your head around what's going on, it's quite easy to see that it can be quite insulting, really. You don't know how my head works.
Yep.
You might think you do, but you're not living my life.
Absolutely. And I think both Liz and I are saying a big thank you and happy to take the questions when that's the right time.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much for that, Wenn and Liz. That was terrific and really, really interesting. And I can see some questions mounting up in the Q&A panel. Just to remind everyone that if you would like to ask some questions, please do pop that in the Q&A panel. We're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. So please do start writing those questions. So without further ado, what I'm going to do now is throw to our final presenters of the day, and that is Dr. Ben Milbourn and Rebecca Kuzminski. Ben is an Autism CRC project leader and an academic at the School of OT, Social Work and Speech Pathology at Curtin Uni, and Rebecca is a PhD student at the Curtin Autism Research Group. So what Ben and Rebecca are going to be talking to you today about is a really interesting project that aims to co-produce and evaluate an adult autism quality of life assessment tool. I'm really looking forward to this presentation, so I'll throw to you both, and so take it away.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you so much to everybody who's come to the actual webinar today. So we're going to be talking about our development of our autism specific quality of life assessment used with autistic adults. I would just like to start before I go on to acknowledge my co-lead, Dr. Wenn Lawson, who was in the previous presentation, and also Miss Rebecca Kuzminski, who's going to be doing the second part of the presentation today. Rebecca's PhD is very strongly aligned to this project. Also like to acknowledge the rest of our team, Professor Sonia Gerler, Dr. Marita Falkmer, and Professor Sven Bolte. So I suppose just kind of thinking about the importance of quality of life and how it actually influences how we look at everyday life, how we actually start to kind of think about what drives us, what motivates us. I think it's also really important that throughout this presentation I will be referring to people as autistic adults, and I know there was a comment that came up about the community, and that's very much how people want to be referred to. So I think it's really important to kind of prescribe to that. I think if we look at the work that's kind of out there, and particularly some work that was done, I think in sort of 2016, 2017, when we start to think about things such as mortality rates and the relationship between quality of life and how that influences how people go about their day-to-day life, they were saying, well, there's not really much out there. And I think this is so important, in particular relevance to National Disability Insurance Scheme and funding. There's a lot of discussion at the moment around functioning, but what is it that actually contributes to quality of life? How might people perceive it, how they might kind of understand it? And again, there's been very little work in trying to understand how we look at quality of life. There's a gentleman in the UK, Jeremy Parr, who's kind of started that work. So we're very, very fortunate to kind of put forward a proposal to this Autism CRC to say, well, okay, look, this is actually something really important, and if we are going to start doing this, then we actually need to think about what's influencing quality of life. And we know historically that autistic adults, the autistic community, do have difficulty or poorer outcomes in higher education, in independent living, in positive mental health outcomes, and all of these things contribute to quality of life. So I would like to now just hand over to Rebecca, who's going to talk a little bit more about the actual project and certainly how we framed it within a co-production lens.
Thanks, Ben. So we did try to use a co-production model throughout our project, and what we've really done is we've established a steering group of 5 autistic adults. The reasons for doing this is that it improves the quality of the research, it makes the results more impactful, and it also provides some empowerment to the community by ensuring that we're working on things that are important to them. So initially we set out by talking to autistic researchers who are also involved in the project and discussing how we could look at the Autism CRC's co-production guidelines and utilise the principles within that and involve these in our project. So along with our consumer advocate, we got a group of autistic adults through recruiting through the Consumer Community Health Research Network. And they've been involved throughout the project, and I'll sort of discuss how as we talk about the different studies we've been doing. It was really important to us, though, that before we started meeting with the group, that we built some rapport before that first meeting, and that we really considered the environments in which we meet, making sure that when we meet, it's in a location that's comfortable for everybody, preferably not in a space like one of the meeting rooms that we use for our meetings at Curtin, somewhere that would make everybody feel equal. We've also been able to involve community members who are not just in the local community, but in the broader community, like in regional areas of the country as well. So the first study that we've undertaken as part of this project is a quality of life interview study. So our objective was to identify aspects of the life story of autistic adults, which they perceive to be most important in contributing to their quality of life. So this was a semi-structured interview, and we utilised an interview guide which was developed with our steering committee. So we agreed on all of the questions together and spent a lot of time redeveloping the questions so that everybody was comfortable with them. We then recruited adults aged 18 to 55 years to take part in this interview study. We selected this age range due to the limits in sampling participants over 55 years of age, which we saw through the Australian Bureau of Statistics and also the Australian Longitudinal Study of Adults with Autism, or the ALSA study, also run through the CRC. We recruited participants through Curtin Autism Research Group, Therapy Focus, a provider here in Western Australia, and the Autism Open Day held by Curtin University and Telethon Kids Institute, and conducted 28 interviews. Each participant had access to the interview guide before we begun the interviews, just to give them some predictability about the interview. And those interviews were conducted however was most comfortable for the participants. So they were either in person, via video call, phone call, or even instant messaging. We've begun analysis using interpretive phenomenological analysis. And so far, the findings that we've started to see is that passions were very, very important to quality of life. So much so that some people reported restructuring their schedule in their day so that they could fit their passion in at some point. Relationships were also reported to be extremely important to quality of life, as well as sensory preferences. So from here, we then undertook a photo voice study with the same objective in mind. And now photo voice is a method in which you ask participants to take photos of something in a particular topic, and then a discussion involves about the meaning of that photo and its relation to the topic. So we recruited participants through our first interview study, as well as through other social media groups, and was really fantastic. We were able to design this method with our steering group, particularly one member of the steering group who is a photographer himself. And we were able to design how long would people be able to take photos for, would we put parameters around how many photos people would provide, and all of those things, and then produced a video which provided all of this information, including how the analysis and the interview sort of phases would be undertaken with the person as well. So that person and I made this video, and this was then sent to everybody prior to starting their photo taking. The photo taking period was up to 3 months, and each participant provided up to 20 photos. Following this, we held 2 focus groups in which each participant brought 3 of their photos that they were comfortable sharing with a group. We then took the time to discuss the meaning of each photo one by one, and the participant had the opportunity to provide an idea of what themes they thought they were portraying in the photo, and that was important for them to share with us. After that, they provided a title, and the group also had an opportunity to reflect on what the person had talked about and ask questions about other themes they thought could have been relevant to their particular photo. With the remaining photos of the people who had taken part in the focus group, but also for people who weren't comfortable to take part in a focus group, an individual interview was conducted as well, where again we went through the same process of identifying the meaning in the photos and themes. So I have an example here of one of the participants' photos, and you can see there is the title of the photo. This is a brief description, although the conversation was quite detailed. This is a summary of the description, and then the themes that were identified by the person and also the focus group that they were involved in. So the preliminary themes, again, we're in the process of analysing this data, but preliminary themes that we've seen is that relationships are very important to quality of life. For people who had established relationships that they were satisfied with, these were really positive, but also for people who weren't satisfied with their relationships, it was important to them to seek to establish more relationships with people. Both physical and mental health was discussed as being extremely important and impactful on quality of life, particularly if people experienced episodes of illness or more challenges with mental health. This had a rather negative impact on their quality of life. And passions again came up here, being a profoundly positive impact on quality of life. Participants reported, again, scheduling of their daily routines so that they could try and fit their passions in, but also that often the amount of time they spent engaging in their passions would change depending on how other areas of their life was impacting their quality of life. So for instance, if they were experiencing a period of increased mental distress, they might engage in their passions more, as this brought them more happiness. Socialisation was also discussed as important. A lack of socialisation was discussed as having a negative impact, and socialising in a predictable situation, as well as with people who are familiar and within a familiar environment, was also reported to have a very positive impact on quality of life. Multiple participants discussed how their identity and acceptance of their identity was very positive for their quality of life. And many also discussed sensory preferences and sensitivities that were impacting on their quality of life, and how their environments in which they worked and lived, if they were able to adapt to their sensory preferences and sensitivities, this improved their quality of life as well. So these themes are all important areas to include in a quality of life assessment going forward as we continue through this research. I'd also like to thank all of the people who have been involved, supervisors, other researchers involved on the project, of course our Lived Experience Steering Committee. And if there are any other questions, we would love for you to let us know during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Ben. That was terrific. So if I could ask all of the presenters, please, to come back onto the screen, that would be terrific, and we can have a bit of question time now. If you'd like to ask further questions, please do put them in the Q&A, a little box down there with 2 speech bubbles, and we'll get to them. My first question will be for Liz and Wenn. Liz and Wenn, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the longer term impact of your really interesting and important work. Do you feel that this is an exercise in discovery only, or do you feel that it will have beneficial effects in terms of understanding and even further going forward? So I'll throw to Liz or Wenn.
Who do you want to go first, Wenn?
Well, I just wanted to say that not only did it give a platform to adults who were newly diagnosed as such, but we're hoping that this will be an ongoing situation where we can have this hosted online and other people can interact with stories from people of the past. So it presents a platform for the future as well as the present, which I'm sure Liz can expand on.
Yeah, thanks, Wenn. Yeah, I mean, oral history projects usually are made public, so they're publicly accessible, so that other people can, you know, understand or be able to hear people's life stories and learn from them. And that's exactly what we're doing in this particular project as well. So it's very different from kind of typical autism research where everything's anonymous and you try very, very hard to make sure everything's confidential. In this case, we had some people who didn't want to be named at all, and that was absolutely fine. But almost all of our participants have agreed to use their names and let us use their audio-visual interviews, and they will be made public. So I think there is, just to answer your question, Andrew, what's important about this project is not only the analysis we'll do in terms of, you know, discovering the issues particularly around diagnosis and how people grew up, etc. But also just, I think this will be, it's a collection of people's stories. what's that people can build upon. I mean, that's what's really important. We've just yesterday, in fact, we heard that we have a protocol paper coming out in BMJ Open on our methods that other people, hopefully all around the world, will be able to use. And so we'll have international perspectives on the late diagnoses of autistic adults.
Great. Thank you both. That's really, really interesting, and it is quite different to typical autism research, but different in a really fabulous way. So it's fabulous to hear. You also just for Liz and Wenn again, you also outlined really well the benefits that people perceive they got from talking about their stories, as well as the challenges that they have. I wonder at this early stage, and no is also a reasonable answer here, whether you'd be willing to share any of the learnings for the autism clinical community or society more generally of what we've learned from some of these stories.
Am I able to say something?
Yes.
Yes. It was just been an incredible opportunity, absolutely, to hear people's stories. And I felt so honoured listening to the interviews that were given and taken by the other researchers, and then coming in to do the last interview with Liz for session 4. The mental health issues, relationship issues, missed opportunities, and relief when people were able to put a name to what they've been living with. There was I felt an incredible sense of sadness over what people had to live through. And as an autistic person myself with a late diagnosis, there was so much that I identified with, which I know the other researchers who were also late identified with too. Identified used twice, that sounds a bit odd, but never mind. So there were all of those things, and there'll be lots more. Some gender issues that the other 2 researchers talked about, which I have perhaps a slightly different take on, but all of that we'll unpack, obviously, as we move forward. So there were lots of things, and the relief was the biggest issue, I think, at finding a name that explained and enabled people to find their community, join a family where they felt they could belong.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much for that. I might throw quickly to Rebecca and Ben. Rebecca and Ben, probably the same question as the first one that I asked with Liz and Wenn. What do you see as the long-term use of the tool that you're developing? Is it for use within clinical practice? Is it used for individuals by themselves? Is it for use in research such as clinical trials? I'd be really interested in your views as to how this can be used to benefit the autistic community.
Thanks, Andrew. I would say really that the tool, our hope is it can be used by autistic individuals, it can be used by researchers, and it can be used in the community. I think, and I'm conscious of a question that somebody kind of asked in the chat room, and I think might help answer this. You know, the idea of a picture telling 1,000 stories, and I think it's so important that the idea of us being able to use a methodology such as photo voice to actually elicit real understanding around what contributes to quality of life, what are the dominant things which we've started to sort of to unravel from looking at those photos, from talking with people out there in the community. I then think from taking that, and the next kind of step of our project is trying to kind of test those constructs and trying to get a really accurate kind of picture of how efficacious is that tool being used by different populations, such as people in the community, such as parents. Again, the idea that people don't necessarily have the vocabulary or words to be able to talk about what is important to them. We need other methodologies out there to be able to support. And again, come back to what I said at the start around NDIA and going through that planning process, having other tools available. I think that's so important.
Great. And we have a question here about, was there anything in your research or the research process that surprised you at all?
I might hand that one to Rebecca, because there was quite a few things that surprised us.
Yeah, I think using the photo voice method was a wonderful thing to do. I was surprised at the level of detailed conversation that we were having about specific things. I felt as though having a visual there, it would give me a rough idea to begin with, but for some people being able to go into such depth of detail and how these things, what these things meant to them and the meaning that you couldn't always see in the image that they could discuss was fantastic. I also thought it was fantastic how we could understand a little bit more about the influence of passions on quality of life, as well as that socialization and building of relationships. It was wonderful to be able to also have these discussions, not only in an individual conversation, but to go into the groups and have these discussions and hear that one person's experiencing what they're talking about with their photo, every other person in the group or some other people in the group would also be relating to that and building on this understanding. It was really lovely. Also, the sort of I suppose engagement of the community. People were engaging with other people within these groups, and this sort of feeling that people felt connected to other people by discussing their experiences of their quality of life with one another as well, which I thought was wonderful.
And just a quick follow-up, do we have a question here, do autistic people gauge quality of life differently? For example, not conforming to mainstream values. Obviously, it's extraordinarily difficult and probably flawed to make sweeping judgments, but I wonder whether you have any insights to share on that regard.
You go, Rebecca.
Like you said, Andrew, I think it wouldn't be fair for us to make a judgment without having looked at both in depth. But having looked in depth at autistic perspective, I'd say there is maybe some subtle differences in things related to passions, which we're now further looking into. So we've been able to have some honours students who are involved in this project as well look at the special interest data collected through the ALSA survey, which compares the engagement in interests between autistic adults and neurotypical adults. And from looking at that data, we've now created a survey which the students are piloting at the moment to understand a little bit more about how special interests or passions are, I suppose, impacting quality of life of neurotypical adults and autistic adults as well.
Yeah. Ben, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I suppose I just remember meeting one of our lovely participants, and one of the stories we heard about was very much about the relationship between a passion or a focused interest or special interest, whatever terminology you're using, and that kind of filtering into everyday activity, how it influenced routine, how it influenced work choices, how it actually influenced motivation towards education. It just really stood out for us, and I think that area around passion focused interest is something we really need to kind of look at further. And certainly we'd be really keen. We do have a survey, not trying to plug further research, but
no, plug away.
We'd be really keen for people to actually have a look at that survey for us and tell us about your passions and focused interests.
Fantastic, and we can try and pop that into the webinar chat as well, that people can look at the link to that. Final question for Liz and Wenn. You have answered these already, but I think it might be nice for the broader group to hear it. How did you recruit the participants within the study, and is there still an opportunity to participate? And then the second one is, where will it be made available at the end of it? So if you wouldn't mind answering them for the broader group, that'd be fabulous.
I'll let Liz answer those, because
Liz,
I'll chat too long.
Liz, you're on mute at the moment.
Sorry. Yeah, just quickly, we recruited through people, mainly through social media and through extensive connections, particularly our autistic researchers, extensive connections with the autistic community and organisations within that community. So lots of it was word of mouth and social media, really. Unfortunately, the study has closed. We were meant to recruit 24 people. We managed to recruit more people, but to actually interview 28 people. So we've done better than we had possibly hoped, which is amazing, particularly with such a group of people, so who are in mid to late adulthood, who are, you know, there is very, very little research anywhere in the world on that particular group of people. So so thanks everyone so much for taking part in that project, but unfortunately it's closed to anyone else. We're very much love to do more research in this area. So if people are interested, please get in touch about that.
And the results.
And your second question, sorry.
And where will it be made available?
So we're writing up the results or we're analysing the results now, and we'll write them up. In terms of the interviews themselves, we're still working on that. So oral history collections are usually available in libraries, so people and online, so people can, you know, go online and listen to interviews, and that's how we hope to make them available.
Thank you.
For those people who consented to do that.
Yeah, thank you. That's terrific, and thank you. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to plug if needed. But thank you so much for that. And can I also just thank the presenters once again for their time, their expertise, and their dedication to what is clearly very valuable research. Just to let everyone know that there is a link to a feedback form which is included in the chat box down below, not the chat bot, the chat box down below. Fill that out, and we'd love to do that because we're learning, we're always learning, and we're seeking to understand how we can make this better for you. I just want to thank personally Donna, Liz, Wenn, Ben, and Rebecca for sharing their time and experiences. This webinar series has been really popular with over 1,000 registrations, which is terrific across 4 sessions. If you'd like to be able to share today's webinar, we'll be placing a recording on of the session on the YouTube channel, so please share it, and the presentations will be made available as well. We'll also be sharing it on Facebook and Twitter. If you'd like to know more about the Autism CRC's work across the lifespan, please visit the website, the Autism CRC website, which you'll be able to Google, and it will come up very, very quickly. There's not much else for me to do other than to, number one, thank the behind-the-scenes team, Kelly and Tori. These events don't just organise themselves, they take a lot of effort, and we really do appreciate Kelly and Tori for all of their effort in doing this. Finally, thank you to you. An hour out of anyone's diary is tough, particularly during a time when you're managing a whole lot of different priorities. We really do appreciate you tuning in, and we hope that you've had a lot out of it. My name's Andrew Whitehouse, and I just want to thank you to all our presenters and to you again. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Bye.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.